Hello, welcome back to Skyrim Talks. This is the series where I talk about random topics while playing Skyrim. Here on Home with the Harrisons, we publish a video every Monday at noon Central Time. I do gaming and philosophy, and my wife does cooking and lifestyle content. So if you like any of that sort of thing, please go ahead and subscribe and click on the bell so you can get a notification every time we post. So the topic today is gaming related. It's choosing character builds as a player or for a player in role-playing games. I'll be talking about it in the
something I can do for you?
and largely from the perspective of a DM helping a player rather than from a player themselves, but it's applicable either way. If you don't ever really DM, well, then this is an opportunity for you to sort of see things from the DM's perspective, at the same time as getting good advice on how to build a character. So why this topic? I see all the time where players either get pushed to play a particular character build because it is quote unquote easy, or because no one else wants to play it. In D&D, this is invariably either the fighter or the cleric. Frankly, there's no worse way to bring people into D&D. If someone is new, you shouldn't be trying to make things easy for them, at least not super easy, and especially not using them to role fill. Just because no one else wants to be a cleric doesn't mean you force the new person to be a cleric. Clerics are actually not an easy class to get right. Frankly, the cleric should be played by an experienced player who understands how to get the most out of the class, not just be a heal bot. If all you want is a heal bot, buy some wands, or ask your DM for some wands of cure wounds. Anyway, D&D is a game. We are playing it to have fun, so we should point players to classes and builds that we think will be particularly interesting to them. So to do that, here's the things to think about when you're trying to decide what sort of character someone should play as. First, what are the party roles, and what party roles interest them? Second, what sort of archetypes interest them? Third, the backstory and motivations of the other player characters. And fourth, the focus of the campaign itself. So when we're trying to figure out what sort of character someone should play, the first thing we should think about is party roles. So let's start with some role definitions. Most of you are probably familiar with most of these, but let's run them down. First, in combat roles. So the first in combat role, role 1, is the tank. The tank needs to be able to take a hit. This is the obvious part. But also the tank needs to be able to draw a hit. Ideally, the tank is able to make himself the only target in the room, and then either avoid or soak the hits so the rest of the party can crush face. Granted, in D&D this is particularly hard because you're facing opponents that are displaying intelligence. They're not just algorithms. They are the DM deciding what these characters would do in the particular situation. But there are mechanics in D&D that can make this easier, and you can also use your own intelligence and guile to try to trick enemies into coming after you rather than others. But anyway, role 2 is the striker. The striker is all about doing as much damage as possible, as fast as possible. Typically to a single target, like the boss, but not necessarily. How they're doing that damage, though, is less important than the fact that they can do that damage pretty reliably. Role 3 is the controller. The controller's job is to deliver opponents to the tank and the striker, preferably one at a time, while upside down asleep. The controller has a difficult but incredibly important job. A good controller in the party can turn any encounter into a beatable encounter, no matter how hard. Role 4 is the leader. The leader's job is to buff the party. provide healing when necessary, typically only to get a party member back up again. That's action economy. And also support other roles as much as possible. Alright, but combat isn't everything. D&D is not an MMORPG. You have to be able to navigate a much more fleshed out world. Some campaigns are dungeon delving, combat-focused tactical combat games, but I dare say that most are not. So now we have to decide on your party role outside of combat. There is a lot more flexibility here, but here are some common roles that your party likely will have to fill in one way or another. The first is, of course, the face. The face is the big talker who smooth things over with NPCs to try to avoid
I'm on my way to
conflict in the first
Solitude.
place. Whether smooth talking, spinning tall tales, or all bluster, the face gets the party into trouble and gets them out again.
The Legion. A united
The
empire
second
is better for
is
everyone.
the corpse. The corpse is the ultimate risk taker, thus the name. The party member who sees a hallway full of traps and angry dragons with a pile of treasure on the other side and says, I have a plan to get to the other side without getting caught or dead. The party member willing to go alone into the dungeon just to get the lay of the land. Why are they called the corpse? Because they often wind up dead. Role 3, the muscle. This guy's job, or lady's job, is to look tough, break stuff, and do all those crazy feats of athleticism. You need a door broken down? Call the muscle. You need someone to literally throw a dwarf over a 30-foot chasm? You call the muscle. Our last out-of-combat role is utility. This is the person who has a trick up their sleeve to deal with a weird situation. Getting the party past traps, puzzles, and otherwise out of hot water that you really couldn't have predicted. So, we have 4 in-combat roles and 4 out-of-combat roles. Generally, you would think that each party member takes one of each and focuses on that. Got a 4-man party with all their bases covered. This is classic D&D. But it doesn't have to work like that. It is perfectly possible to have fun at D&D with roles that are unfilled, and with roles doubled up. I've heard of campaigns that were a blast, where every party member played a meathead barbarian. Every one of them, tank / striker / muscle. No face, no leader, no controller, no corpse. But anyway. Remember, your opponent isn't some scripted preset algorithm, or even particularly trying to kill you. They don't demand optimal strategy. Done right, your DM is your friend. They're trying to present the entire party with interesting challenges. What happens when you have a party of combat-focused meatheads? You get a campaign full of challenges that can be overcome by combat-focused meatheads. Some dungeon masters are highly adversarial and will kill off their party for coming at something with a non-optimal strategy. But frankly, if that is the case, my belief is you need a new DM. And if that's your strategy as a DM, you need a new DM. So, what role should your character fill? Well, it depends on what you find most satisfying. Do you enjoy going toe-to-toe with bad guys, looking tough and laughing when they try to take you down?
If you see any signs of Talos worship,
Tank.
it's your
Do you
obligation
get an undeniable
to report.
satisfaction
Move
from
along.
rolling
Be
15
warned.
dice at once
You have
and
been
watching the
marked by
DM
the Fool.
groan as you count up the damage? You are a striker. Or perhaps you get the most enjoyment from having the DM complain that it doesn't matter what he puts in an encounter, you always make it trivially easy. You, good sir, are a controller. Do you like watching your friends do all the work while you cheer them on sipping an iced tea? Sounds like the leader is the role for you. Do you find combat boring and pointless and just want to talk it out? Play the face. Maybe you like taking risks
Better
and
not
the
be
thrill
here
of
to stir up
knowing that
any
your character
trouble.
lives or dies
What
with
do
all of
you
the
want?
dice.
Yeah?
You sound
Take
like
a look.
corpse. Maybe you want to turn everything into a combat, trying to get past the door and decide to fight it instead. You are the muscle. Maybe your favorite thing is having a solution to every problem, throwing out curveballs and figuring out tough problems with a massive bag of tricks. Welcome to the utility role. So there you have it. Simple as that. Don't let yourself be bullied into a role. Don't worry about having all the roles in the party, and know that you don't have to pick just one. If you take anything away from this, remember those three things. I'll reiterate. Don't let yourself be bullied into a role. Don't worry about having all the roles in the party, and know that you don't have to pick just one. The next thing you should worry about when building a character is what sort of fantasy archetypes interest the player in question. What do I mean by that? Well, fantasy is full of stereotypes, and D&D is not the exception. If anything, it's the rule. D&D is built on fantasy stereotypes. These take many forms. The grumpy mercenary, the noble knight, the roguish trickster, all of these find their home in D&D, and can be built in many ways. D&D gives people the opportunity to play the roles that they have experienced vicariously, many times in media, and enjoy. So why does this matter? I'll use myself as an example first. I love playing controllers in D&D, and two of the best controller classes in the game are the Wizard and the Druid. Nevertheless, I have built countless Wizard characters and have never once played a Druid. Why? I am 100% a city boy. I just
Hearn and I do
can't
so
make
adore
myself
guests.
roleplay the
These
archetype.
guards are such a bore.
It doesn't interest me at all. The whole
We have
I live
guests
in
as
the
often
woods
as we
and must
can,
protect nature
but there
vibe
aren't a lot of
is just
travelers these
completely
days.
lost on me.
The war. Other people just make
Meanwhile,
things
the
complex.
stuffy intellectual,
Out here,
the
Hearn
mad
and I can get
scientist,
everything we
the
need from the
savant,
occasional
I
traveler.
will play those all day.
We supply
That isn't
Felcreath
to say
trades
you
with the
shouldn't
surrounding
stretch
holds,
to find new
and without
avenues
our
of play,
wood,
but
they
if
would
the
have trouble
character
keeping their
concept
prices
doesn't
low.
resonate with you or your player, if you're the DM,
Alright then.
doesn't resonate with you or your player, if you're the DM, you shouldn't use it. If you try to force it, you're likely to just not enjoy the game. There are countless possible ideas out there, so keep
Just a
trying
few
until you
more
find
hours
something.
and I can crawl under some furs.
Another thing to keep in mind is what sort of characters are the rest of the players playing. This is why every campaign should have a session 0, where everyone comes together and builds their characters together, because inter-character chemistry makes for interesting play. They don't need to agree on everything, but if two characters are openly antagonistic, feelings will be hurt.
Yes?
For example, take the uber-lawful paladin who abides no crimes and sees it as his duty to arrest all criminals and see them hanged, and combine him with a criminal background rogue with kleptomania. If you don't have infighting by the end of the first session, mark me down as surprised. If they're both still alive by session 5, I can guarantee that one of both of them is not really role-playing the character they built. There really is a simple solution, though. Let people come up with concepts, but don't have them locked down on anything until everyone can talk to each other. Probe every player to find out what sort of character they're thinking of, and try to identify the conflicts. Get them to talk about it. Right there, modify their backstories and concepts to make room for the others. Perhaps the paladin sees it as noble's right to take what they please, noblesse oblige, and the rogue is of noble birth. Crisis averted. Rogue can steal whatever he wants. Lastly, we need to think about the direction of the campaign itself. There are certain campaigns where certain characters just don't fit. Take our aforementioned uber-lawful paladin and put him in a Cloak and Dagger campaign where the players are acting as international spies. You might be able to cram him in there, but it's gonna be tough. Better to choose something a little different, a little more pragmatic. They can even still be a paladin, just modify the concept for the character somewhat. Maybe they're not so much generic lawful, but instead devoted to king and country. And it works. Once again, I cannot reiterate
Easy
this
thing to
enough.
make a living in the
Session
wilds of
0.
Skyrim.
Got a clean
This
book
is
around
where
here
you deal
somewhere.
with stuff like this. You don't have to tell the players the plot, but as a DM, you should
If you
definitely
need a
give them
meal
a
or
vague
room,
idea
I've
of the
got-
style
Sure
of
thing.
campaign you're
It's yours for a
planning.
day.
High-flying generic adventure,
Right this
solving
way.
mysteries, society and politics, dungeon delving smash and
Hi
grab.
there.
Once they know, They can build their character concepts to fit, and you can help them with that. This also goes into the party roles. If you're playing a political campaign, it would be totally reasonable for the party to be all face characters of some type. In fact, I would encourage it. It isn't necessary, but if everything is social encounters, the beefcake fighter with a charisma of 6 who just stands there grunting might get a bit bored. So, there's what I got for you.
Staying
I
safe,
won't
I
go
hope.
into actual builds. Well, maybe I will. I got time left. I recorded the Skyrim first, and now I'm doing this in voiceover. I'm only about halfway through. So let's go into some character builds I've done in the past. I'm just gonna look these up. So let's start with my current character. So, I had never played a striker type character before, a damage dealing type character before. I was really interested in doing so. So, I decided, first did it as an exercise. I built out, okay, how could I do the most damage possible? And what I came up with was pretty ridiculous. It was a multi-class Warlock Bard Paladin who would do double smite madness. And, well, yeah, that was a little too extreme. So instead I thought, okay, well, my only goal is not going to be just to do in-combat striker. I want to do more than that. That's not really all that I want to do. So I decided to drop Paladin and focus more on Bard, giving me more social sorts of things. Now, I had found in my previous campaign where I had played a controller that I really got frustrated when I wasn't a major participant in social encounters. My character's charisma was terrible, and every social encounter I was just a waste of space or making things worse. So this time, by playing a Warlock Bard, which is a both charisma classes, I could really focus on that social stuff while still doing very good damage.
I swear there's something out there in the dark.
Now further, when we get into archetypes, Warlock Bards, it's a common multi-class, but most often you see them as ranged attackers throwing out Eldritch Blast from a distance, doing the same thing every round. And I looked at that sort of ideal build, and it just sounded so boring. I wanted to be up there in the face of it, even if, this character is not intended to ever be a tank. They're not good at that. Their HP is too low. Their AC is reasonable, but their HP is too low. So instead, I decided to go Hexblade and build a melee character. So he goes into the thick of it with his axe every combat. He only casts Eldritch Blast when he literally cannot get into melee range. And his whole thing is to run in, hit, run out. Run in, hit, run out. And to augment that with all of his spells and find interesting ways to really maximize that damage with the Eldritch Smite and it's so much fun. We've been playing this campaign for about a year now. He's up to level 12. For example, in our campaign today, it was the Druid and I in a grudge match against this uber earth elemental creature that was a champion for this genie, and it was a tough fight, but we won, and I got to show off some cool abilities, and I had a ton of fun misunderstood character. So my previous character from that, he was a cleric wizard, 1-level cleric, and then all wizard. And he was a necromancer. Why a necromancer? Because I've always found the idea of playing the misunderstood necromancer, who's not actually evil, but really just wants to make the best use of corpses that society possibly could. I mean, they're just rotting bones. Why not have them do some good in the world? So this was that character. He was very much the mad scientist type. He collected bones for a museum.
What's a milk drinker like you
of
doing
any
out
type
here?
he could find.
Go home to your mother.
Constantly had his undead army with him.
Why? What are you gonna do?
But he wasn't
I don't
actually
have to
a
take
bad
that from you.
person.
Is
I
someone
dare
there?
say. Like, he just wanted to make things better. And he just wasn't necessarily really very knowledgeable about how to do that. I picked a fight with this orc that I probably shouldn't have. But hey, I lived through it. I didn't even have to load a save. Picked up some info.
Glory.
Alright, that was actually, so that character, his primary job was as a controller. But he also had a sort of secondary job as a tank via his undead servants. Because the party didn't have another tank. We had a fighter who acted as a striker. We had a rogue that acted as a leader. Yeah, you usually hear rogues as strikers, but this was a mastermind rogue, and what she did was act as the leader, providing assists to everybody else. She rarely did much damage herself. And then our last character, well, for the first few levels, was a paladin that ended up dying. So sort of a tank, sort of a striker, but he died, and then got replaced by a warlock. So yeah, another striker. So we had 2 strikers, we had leader, and then my character was the controller and the tank. Except occasionally the fighter also had to jump in the tank, even though he was an archer, just because it became necessary, and if my undead servants weren't able to do it, yeah. So yeah, that's a case of filling the roles and having multiple roles. But yeah, I got very frustrated with that character out of combat, because in every social situation, his terrible charisma just messed him up. You know, out of combat, he was the utility. So I enjoyed being the controller in combat, but I didn't like being utility out of combat. And yep. So that was just my personal preference. But again, you see where the archetype fit what I enjoy. And also, as a party, we meshed well together. It was an Underdark campaign. It was Out of the Abyss. So, you know, there wasn't a lot of room for being persnickety about the undead, and the, you know, towns in the Underdark don't care that much about, you know, oh, it's a necromancer, he raised the dead, what can he do? Like, that's a dime a dozen down here. Yeah. Yep. My character before that, though, rather than being the mad scientist type, is also a cleric wizard, 1-level cleric, and then wizard. But a diviner wizard instead of a necromancer. She really focused on the sort of holier than thou type, where she was a savant who was very devoted to making the world a better place. And she had left the monastery where where she had been a cleric to go study wizardry because she felt like she wasn't doing enough good in the world. And she was a really fun character to play as well. And she was controller utility as well. So I had more fun with her as utility. Yeah. So yeah, in the Skyrim game here, I'm a vampire in this Skyrim game, and I'm trying to find a place to sleep out the day because it just got to the point where it's late enough that there's daylight, but it won't let me sleep in the beds in Helgen Keep. Yeah, so I'm searching all over Helgen Keep. Trying to find a bed that I can actually sleep in. It doesn't work. Yeah. Some other examples. My wife, Jessie, she always plays as a sort of striker leader hybrid. Where she likes to stand back, have a bow that she can do some reasonable damage with, and occasionally throw out some buff spells or encouragement to the allies without ever getting into the thick of it herself. That's very much her style. So she'll often play as a ranger. I also, because I do a fair amount of homebrew sort of stuff, I've got my own campaign setting and all that. I also built her a custom factotum class based on the 3rd edition factotum for 5e. So she played as that in our last campaign, and so that allowed her to really do a support role very well, and then use her crossbow from back to do a little damage. And that's how she enjoys to play. Out of combat, she tends to just kind of zone out a little bit because she just struggles with that, with being attentive. Some other people, another friend of ours, really likes to do the combat piece of it, and she played. She was the wizard in our last campaign, and out of combat wasn't really her thing. She was sort of kind of a little bit utility and almost the muscle as the wizard, where she would blow stuff up. She was an evoker wizard, and she had a lot of fun with that. You get into combat, and she was a striker basically. Her whole shtick in combat was to destroy the enemy as quick as possible, with precision attack evocation spells, which evocation wizards are really good at. They can exclude their allies from the area of effect so long as they can see them. Worked really well for her. Got about 5 minutes left here on Skyrim. I still haven't realized that I can't go out the other side of Helgen Keep. So I think I'm going to leave it at that for the D&D stuff. I'll just do some commentary on the Skyrim from here out. Alright, so I teleported back to the entrance of Helgen. Because I didn't want to go all the way back through Helgen Keep by foot. And so now I'm on to Riverwood. In the sunlight, so I can try to find a place to sleep through the day. It burns the sun. I can't recover magicka or stamina while I'm in the sunlight. It sucks. I'm mostly just hoping I don't get, eaten by wolves. So pretty sure I can't recover health either. Okay. Oh, these guys, right. Yeah, so I have the mod Rigmore of Bruma installed. So this is the party searching for Rigmore, the Thalmor party.
What do you mean you can't find her? Keep
I won't
looking.
get to that this time, but probably next time.
You there. Be on your way.
For now, I just want to get to Riverwood as quickly as possible. And down the mountain, down the mountain. Ooh. Yes. Oh, an imp. Well, we're gonna need that. It doesn't kill us. Yeah, killed the imp. Those are added by a mod. Now to activate the Mage Stone. We can go with the thief. Where's the thief? There's the thief. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I usually don't have a problem getting my mage skills leveled up quickly. I do mage stuff constantly, but I use the thief skills, but I somehow can never get them to level up as fast, so I find it better to do the thief stone, even though I'm primarily a mage character. Still gotta pick them locks. Still gotta do the sneaky. Almost to Riverwood. Just gotta avoid the combat. There we go. Oh, I hear a wolf. Maybe. Just gonna keep going. Keeping going.
Legs playing up.
See the gates.
I should see a healer one of these days.
Riverwood. Woo! We made it. We're alive.
Feindal thinks he
Don't
can
mind
rip
my
little
eyes.
berries away from me. She's already
Teleport
mine.
book. And to the inn.
What do you need?
Oh, yeah. Apparently I have a quest objective in here. There
Come on
we
in.
go.
Let me know
There
if
we
you
go.
need anything. Or take a seat by the fire and I'll send someone over.
Alright. I'm gonna wrap up in here. Anyway, thanks for listening to me.
You're
rant.
that visitor been
I hope you
poking
learned something
around.
useful. Go ahead and hit that
I'm
like
the-
and
sure
subscribe button
thing.
if you want to see
It's
more
yours
of
for a
these when I
day.
come out with them. And if you like, you can hit the little box in the bottom left and watch another video that YouTube thinks you'll like. And I'm